Hello, thank you all for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about how information management and process automation can streamline the HR onboarding process. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. I'm Teresa Tsvetkov, the Content Marketing Editor here at Therefore, and I'll be presenting this material alongside with our Media Manager, Kono Fusco. Okay, so let's start by first going over the agenda for this session. We want to deliver a compact and powerful presentation here, so we've split the session into 4 separate parts. So if you take a look at our fun little subway map here, you can see we'll start by talking about the onboarding process in general and explaining the challenges and problems that come up as a part of this process. So once we've done that, we'll then see about perfecting the process. So in other words, how to use Therefore to eliminate the problems we talked about earlier and make the onboarding process more efficient and streamlined using information management and process automation solutions. After we've talked about all of that, then we'll take a break from the PowerPoint slides and show you a demo, a real-life demo, using Therefore for the onboarding process, recorded straight from our demo server. And finally, at the end of the session, we want to share a case study with you about a customer who's using Therefore in their HR department and the success they've had with our software. So on that note, Kono, can I ask you to introduce us a bit to the onboarding process in general?
Yeah, sure. So let's start off by taking a look at the bigger picture. Now, generally, when we're speaking about HR in terms of content management and business process automation, HR is viewed as basically 4 processes that address the life cycle of employment. And this starts, of course, with recruitment, where a company runs through the process of finding potential candidates. Then once the new employee gets the job, they're going through the onboarding process as they get started. And after that, we fall into the management phase during the employee's time at a company. And this can include lots of sub-processes like managing vacation requests, expense reports, and so on. And finally, at the end of the employment life cycle is offboarding, which in many ways is kind of the reverse of onboarding as far as processes are concerned, but also includes another important factor, which is document retention, to adhere either to company guidelines or to legal obligations. Now, as you can imagine, there's overlap between these processes as they work together throughout the employment life cycle. But since we don't want to keep you here for 2 hours today, we're just going to be focusing specifically on HR onboarding, where Therefore absolutely excels. So what exactly is HR onboarding? We just want to clarify here that the onboarding process is not just restricted to things like signing the contract and getting a workstation set up. I mean, sure, these actions are part of the whole, but there's also the intangible aspect of the process, which is how a new hire adjusts to their job role and attains the knowledge, skills, or behaviors they need to function effectively within the company. So this covers a broad range of tasks related to administration and provisioning, orientation and training, and finally, evaluation. So let's see what we actually mean by this. This pre-boarding phase can sometimes be part of the recruitment phase or serve as a bridge between the recruitment and the onboarding phases. And this is where the employment contract would be signed, and maybe the employee might receive a sort of welcome package before their first official day. On the administrative side, we're talking about things like setting up workspaces, getting clearances or badges, and requesting any other missing information like tax forms. On the orientation and training side, this includes activities such as explanations of company procedures and policies, and may even include specific job role training. And the final step of the onboarding process is the evaluation, where a scheduled interview takes place after a set amount of time, let's say after the first month, to determine whether or not both parties agree to continue the employment relationship. So let's take a look now at a big challenge in this process, something everyone has experienced at some point. And in this case, we're talking about administrative inefficiency. So this slide is meant to give you an idea of how the onboarding process can quickly become an administrative nightmare if not controlled carefully and done efficiently. So first, there's the issue of getting the new hire's signature on the contract, which can be pretty time intensive if the person isn't local. The document needs to be sent by mail, signed, and then mailed back. Now, obviously, this is a huge time waster, but it's also exposing you to the risk of losing the contract, which may contain confidential information. Obviously, it could also delay the start date of the employee. And once the contract is signed, HR then has to make sure that all the different departments prepare for the new hire, they schedule training and orientation sessions, and collect all the employee information for filling out onboarding paperwork. And these are things like tax documents, emergency contacts, and so on. And if this is done as a manual process, this obviously takes a lot of time, and it makes it very difficult to maintain oversight of the process. So there's a pretty high chance that something will be overlooked at some point. And also, when you're storing employee information on paper, there's also an increased risk of losing or misfiling information. There's more potential for a breach in confidentiality, and you're going to end up with high physical storage space requirements. So just to quickly recap what we saw, let's see what the main problems with the process were. We're going to break this down into different problem areas so we can see what the main pain points are. So let's first look at the process itself. With the manual process, we're left asking ourselves at any time, where are the documents in the process? Where are the bottlenecks that are slowing everything down? Well, see, with a manual process, it's nearly impossible to tell. And for this same reason, we also have poor control over processing time and no easy way to regulate or correct it if we need to. And of course, as any manual process can have just simple human error, we run the risk of misfiling documents and thus having incomplete employee files. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, industry research shows what kind of effect this can actually have. Not only are about 15% of all documents misfiled or misplaced, but it takes 18 whole minutes on average to find the missing document. Now imagine the large-scale productivity impact this has when employees are regularly spending nearly a third of an hour just looking for something missing. Now, besides the risks to productivity, we're also looking at security risks, which from a legal standpoint is much more serious, of course. So with the manual process, we're running the risk of misplacing documents, which means we're opening ourselves up to confidentiality breaches, which can also expose us to lawsuits and other legal issues regarding liability. At least in the United States, a single violation for confidentiality breaches can be punished with a fine up to $50,000. And a repeat violation can reach the staggering sum of $1.5 million. And as any HR manager in highly regulated industries knows, enforcement is strict and exceptions are hardly ever given. And even trying to fight a fine results in extremely high legal defense costs. Along these same lines, we come to compliance. And here we're talking about ensuring that new hires complete all required forms, and documentation is retained for reporting and compliance purposes. Using the United States as an example again, Forms W-4 and I-9 are standard forms that need to be filled out for employment eligibility and tax withholding purposes for every single new employee. Uncorrected violations for I-9 forms, for example, can cost as much as $1,100, so you really want to make sure you have a mechanism for ensuring the form is filled for every new employee with no exceptions. Of course, similar laws related to compliance exist in pretty much every part of the world, and though the specific details may change, the fact remains that a manual HR process results in a higher chance of non-compliance and the negative effects that come along with it. Now, this next point touches on a more human side of the process, if you want to call it that. So, a bad onboarding process will be obvious to a new hire and may leave a negative impression. A new employee's decision to stay at a company is typically made within the first 6 months of employment, and this generally matches the time range in which an onboarding process goes from start to finish. Now, a bad process can really swing the decision a certain way, and the company, of course, will have lost all the financial and time investment they just put into the new hire. Now, it's simply a fact that many employees nowadays don't stay with the company for very long, and 33% actually leave within the first 2 years on average. It's also not uncommon for a company to replace 50% of their workforce within a 3 to 5 year period. So we can look at this in two different ways. First of all, we want to make sure we have a good onboarding process to encourage new hires to feel welcome and stay for longer. Secondly, to deal with the higher turnover rates in general since the global recessions of the late 2000s, we want to make sure we have an agile and efficient process for onboarding new employees with minimal effort and cost to the company. Now, finally, we get to cost. So there's no doubt about it, hiring new employees costs a lot of money beyond their salaries and benefits. So let's take a look at some statistics. On average, finding a missing document costs $120 in employee wages, and that doesn't include the lost productivity time we talked about earlier. It can also cost up to 150% of an employee's salary to replace them if they leave the company. So as we talked about earlier, it's definitely worth the investment in improving processes to make sure employees stay and feel welcome. And finally, the average company spends $25,000 to fill one filing cabinet and $2,500 per year to maintain it if they're using paper-based processes. The recruitment and onboarding process itself costs companies plenty of money even before an employee has started contributing to the organization. Now, of course, you can say that's a cost of doing business, but it's also possible to reduce these costs drastically by moving away from manual processes and automating them. So now that we've looked at the problems of having a manual HR process, let's see how we can actually perfect the process. Again, we'll look at the 4 main steps of the onboarding process and see where the potential for improvement lies. So, Teresa, would you mind telling us a little bit more about this?
Certainly. Okay, so first let's take a look at pre-boarding. Now, according to the industry research group Aberdeen, best-in-class companies are 35% more likely to have a pre-boarding program, and companies that have a pre-boarding plan increase their chances of retaining new hires by 11%. So we're seeing more justification for not only having a pre-boarding process in general, but also to make sure it's a good one. So the main benefits of this, as we were mentioning earlier, are getting a streamlined contract signing process in place to make hiring smoother. And if you include a welcome package and other information as part of that pre-boarding phase, you're already acquainting the new hire with the company culture and streamlining the administrative process, which will take place once they start. So once we've hired the employee, there's no avoiding it. We have to run through a standard administration and provisioning process. So what this does is basically prepare both sides, the employer and the employee, for starting the employment relationship. Now this means setting up things like workspaces, completing paperwork, and creating an employee file. It's pretty standard stuff, but there's always a justification for doing it faster and better. In fact, industry research from Aberdeen Group shows us that an ECM system with workflow and records management capabilities streamlines the onboarding process and boosts metrics like operational effectiveness, compliance, information security, employee engagement, and retention. And it also results in savings in storage space and labor costs. So moving on to orientation and training, we know that training facilitates self-efficacy and increases retention and productivity in employees. So obviously this is something we want to foster as much as we can. So according to industry research, leading companies use ECM technology to ensure administrative paperwork is minimized. And this is so that the new hire can focus on orientation and training rather than mundane administrative work that, of course, delays their jump into productivity. They're also using ECM to trace and document all training activities, which can reduce liability risks should the employee be terminated at some point. As you know, this is one of the core fundamentals of ECM solutions and something that therefore really excels at. So we see that besides ensuring new hires are properly and efficiently brought up to speed, a well-thought-out orientation training process also reduces a company's risk of facing legal action, which of course saves money and a lot of hassle. Now this is the final phase of the onboarding process where we're looking at the evaluation phase. Again, industry research backs the need to have this as part of the onboarding process. We see that top companies are more than twice as likely to track their new hires' progress in an onboarding process. So we see that this is a best practice for successful organizations. And this is because giving feedback to a new hire not only boosts their confidence in learning, but it also safeguards the company against liability should a wrongful termination suit be filed. And documentation here is really key. Finally, it's clear that an automated process, which provides notification and documentation of all evaluative procedures, gives you much more consistency and traceability when compared to a manual paper-based process. All right, well, we've talked about two important topics up until now, both the problems inherent to a manual onboarding process and the potential for improvement. And now that we're all on the same page about the theory, let's see how this looks in practice. Now, this should go without saying, but therefore is the perfect tool for creating and supporting an efficient, easy-to-use, and reliable onboarding process. So then let's see how exactly, therefore, helps the onboarding process. Now, we'll be showing you a demo we've created for this, and we'll be focusing on the three main points listed here. First, we'll see how Therefore's case management functionality allows you to create a secure archive for employee files. And as we mentioned before, this is going to help us improve the security of our onboarding process and give us more reactivity. Then we'll look at how Therefore helps you to be more productive by seamlessly integrating e-signatures into your onboarding process. And to tie everything together, we'll see how you can use a workflow in Therefore to manage the entire process from start to finish, all while maintaining visibility and traceability. So I'll go ahead and ask Kono to jump on our demo system now, and we can take a look at the employee file.
Right, thanks, Teresa. So let's access this by popping open the Therefore Navigator. And let's see, we've got our case here. This is called Human Resources Office. And now just to clarify, for those who don't know Therefore so well, in Therefore you can save documents into categories, which are logical groupings of documents that belong together. So you can have a category for, let's say, invoices, one for project reports, one for timesheets and things like that. A case is like an electronic binder that links related categories together. Our employee case is actually a perfect example of this, so let's take a look at it. Let me open what we call the case header. And this is like an electronic form of a physical binder where you would have information like employee name, department, etc. But since we're digital, we can add a lot more info here. Things like location, important dates, detailed department information, and so on. So let's now do a search for an employee. I'll do this actually by employee number. And I know the number I'm looking for is 856, so I'll type it here, click find, and I get the result. So that's great. I found my file for the employee Shirley Bruner. So let me open this up. Now, if I click on the case header button up here, I can see the rest of the information. This was all already known, and I could have searched for the case using any of this information. But of course, it makes sense to search by something unique that would give us an exact result like the employee number, instead of searching by department, for example. Now, in Shirley's file here, we can see different categories for different types of documents. We've got things like education, holiday requests, pay slips, training, and so on. I can also see how many documents are in each category. So if I take a look at training, I can see 4 certificates saved in here. Or if I look at onboarding compliance, I can see some of the forms we talked about before, like her W-4 and her I-9. So to view a document, all we have to do is just double click on it. So this is Shirley's entire employee file, where we keep all the information and documentation concerning her employment. Okay, so let's review what we just demoed. We saw that with the case, we have logical information organization grouped by employee, so all related documents are in one place. We can build a whole workflow around the information in this case, and this is our onboarding workflow, which we'll look at in just a minute. But we can also have smaller workflows for specific documents, for example, when an employee files a vacation request. Of course, we can manage permissions to restrict access to each employee's case, and we can set retention policies to automatically keep documents for a certain period of time before deleting them. When an employee leaves, we can also conveniently close a case to prevent further modification and seal the evidence, so to speak. Okay, so let's now move on to the next part of our demo. Now, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at increasing productivity in the process by incorporating a digital signature. So you remember one of the pain points we highlighted earlier was getting an employment contract signed. You need to schedule a date for the new hire to come in, or more likely you need to mail the contract, and that introduces delays and exposes you to risks like losing the document or exposing confidential information. Using the Therefore integration with DocuSign, all of that can be improved. What we'll show you now is an ad hoc task where a user manually sends the document to DocuSign from the Therefore viewer. That's the process we'll look at today, and I'll ask Teresa to show us how this works.
Okay, so let's restart with Shirley's case again. We're going to show you how we built up her employee file. So we decided to hire her, and we need to send her the contract to get it signed. Problem is, Shirley lives currently on the other side of the country, so she can't just pop in and sign the document. What we'll do instead is get her to sign the contract electronically. So we've got her file open. Now let's save the unsigned contract into the recruitment category and label it as such. Great, let's get it signed now. All we have to do is click Get Signed, and the contract gets uploaded automatically to DocuSign. It takes just a second. So we want to send this to Shirley for signing, so we click Add Recipients, and here we can put her information in. Done. Here we can set up how she should sign it. We'll say Shirley needs to sign on the dotted line right here. Done. Click Send, and it's on its way. It really is that easy. Now, as a bonus, we'll even show you what this looks like on Shirley's side. So she gets an email. She can review the contract. And then sign it electronically. The HR manager instantly gets a notification, and the signed contract is sent back. Let's now save this signed version into Therefore. We've prepared an indexing profile for this, so we just select it here, Signed Employment Contracts, and the information is all filled out, and we just have to click Save. So let's go back to our case, and we see the signed contract is already there. All right, so what we saw there was the same as in this diagram here, where we sent the contract through DocuSign, the employee receives it and then signs it, and then finally it's saved back into Therefore. We could have also included an additional step to have the hiring manager sign it if we had wanted to.
Right, thanks for showing us that, Teresa. Okay, so we kicked off the process with a pre-boarding action by getting the contract signed. So now we want to get into the core components of the onboarding process. Let's first take a look at the whole workflow process we've built around this. Now, I know this looks like a very long workflow, but that's just because it's actually a collection of several sub-processes. We'll walk through each sub-process by itself so you can see how the pieces actually fit together in the end. So far, we've done the pre-boarding phase and the contract's been signed. The workflow now moves on to the provisioning stage, and we see that the paths now split into several tasks. So let's switch back to our demo server and see this in action. In our Therefore Navigator, let's take a look at the onboarding workflow now. We see 4 pending tasks here. We have send welcome letter, schedule trainings, prepare workspace, and prepare IT, and these are all assigned to the responsible people. Let's see the workflow history here to illustrate the point and show you where we are within our workflow. So let's say we're the IT manager now, and we want to complete their task. We see our instructions here. A new employee has been hired. Please create an email account. All right, I've done that already, so I'll process the task. And let's take a look at our workflow history again now. We're still waiting for the other 3 parties to finish their tasks. If they don't, the workflow won't move on. So to do that, let's complete their tasks for them. We'll take the task to schedule trainings. Okay, so let's see what our instructions are. Please schedule trainings for the new hire and input data into case header. Okay, I've done that. I can complete the task, but I can't because the option is grayed out. So no, that's not a bug. It's actually completely intentional. So there must be something we're doing wrong. Let's check our instructions again. We have input data into the case header. Okay, so that tells me something. So let's open the case header. So see these fields down here, dates of onboarding training? They're blank now, and unless I enter something there, I can't complete the task and advance the workflow. In this case, to move on, let's enter some dates. And for demo purposes, I'll just enter the same date for all of them now. So once that's done, just click Save and see I can now complete the task because I filled out the requirements. Great, so we're moving on with the workflow now. And we're at this point here. The previous tasks have been completed and we wait for the employee's start date, which we set for today, so just so we can show you the entire demo. And once the day comes, the workflow proceeds here to automatically start 2 sub-processes related to compliance and training. And Teresa is going to show us those now.
Okay, so this is the first sub-process, or the workflow within the workflow. So this is what the process looks like. And it's basically reminding the HR manager to complete standard compliance paperwork, such as tax forms, insurance info, and reporting new hires. So let's take a look at the task to report new hires. So let's check our instructions. It says, please report new hire to state agency, save an onboarding compliance category, and use appropriate index data for document type. Okay, got it. So let's save this document in the compliance category. Okay, good. The case information is already there, so I'm going to pick the right document type and choose the date of completion. Perfect. Save. And yes, now I can complete the task. So we see that we finished one part of this, but we're waiting for the other 2. And once they're complete, the workflow will end. Now let's see the training workflow quickly. As you can see, it's the same concept as the compliance workflow, where tasks need to be completed and documents must be saved in order to proceed. This is really a great way of not only making sure that the necessary tasks are completed, but it also ensures that the documentation has to be present in order to proceed. So it's covering multiple bases here and making sure nothing slips through the cracks. All right, so now that the compliance and training steps are done, we can move to the final step, the evaluation. So as we see in the workflow, after the compliance and training processes start, our workflow waits for the duration of the evaluation period, and then it notifies the HR manager to schedule an evaluation interview. Kono, do you mind showing us how that works?
Absolutely. So let's see. The HR manager is notified by the workflow to schedule an interview. Now they can't complete the task until they've entered the date they scheduled for. And again, for demo purposes, we'll set this to today so we can actually proceed with the workflow. The workflow then waits for that date and gives the manager the task of performing the interview itself. So once the interview is completed, we can save the evaluation in the recruitment category, and let's label it as such. Good. So now that we've reached the end of the process, we can just end it. And if we look now, we can see how all steps were completed, by which user, and at what time. So actually we have perfect traceability of the whole process. So what have we learned from looking at the details of this process? We see that Therefore lets you create highly customizable workflows to cover the entire spectrum of the onboarding process. The process we showed you was just a standard example, but of course you can tailor it to the exact needs of your company. We also saw workflow histories of the work in progress, so we can keep an overview and find any bottlenecks or problems. And the Therefore workflow also lets you set up automatic reminders and notifications of which steps need to happen when and in which order. And this makes the process foolproof because it won't allow you to proceed without having fulfilled the required criteria. It also negates the possibility of a step being forgotten or completed incorrectly. And finally, Therefore offers you different escalation options for tasks that are past due, for example by notifying a manager. So now we've learned all about how Therefore can help you improve your onboarding process. We looked at the problems, the solutions, and how Therefore can help you implement these. But we still haven't asked ourselves, why? It's great to improve processes and all, but what will we see at the end once we've started our new way of working? So as we approach the end of this session now, let's recap the main benefits an efficient onboarding process brings to businesses. The first is reduced costs, and this is brought about by digitizing information, since electronic documents cost less to manage than their paper equivalents, and you can eliminate the need for storage space. Secondly, we see increased productivity and efficiency by improving the speed of the onboarding process and making it easy to find all related information in a single repository. This means employees are spending less time on menial tasks so they can concentrate more on their core duties and really add value to the business. Next, we're looking at benefits to control and compliance. A good onboarding process gives you better visibility, keeps you compliant with regulations, and lets companies make a good first impression on new hires. Of course, better control of the onboarding process in the end leads to improved employee relations. In fact, statistics show that organizations that implement employee onboarding programs can reduce new employee attrition rates by almost 70%, and they can also bring their employees up to productivity a full 2 months faster. And of course, this also has a positive impact on the level of engagement that employees have. And finally, we can't forget about the added benefit of having a confidential and secure archive, which is first of all digital and not physical, so you can easily control access and have an audit trail for compliance purposes. Since your documents can't be physically misplaced or lost in a digital archive, access to information is improved and you're eliminating the risk of losing data. So now that we've shown you how great all of this is, we want to take 2 more minutes just to give you a real-life example of Therefore in action in the HR department. We're excited to show you a short case study now on how our friends at Canon New Zealand implemented Therefore in their HR processes. So basically, what Canon New Zealand have done is that they've converted their paper files to electronic form, allowing them to easily and quickly find their documents. This also resulted, of course, in improved document security. And as a result of this, they've become more efficient in their business practices, and they've improved their ability to respond to customer needs in a timely manner. But of course, I'll play the video now. I'll let you hear all about it yourselves.
So we had a really busy HR team. We were looking for ways that we could increase efficiency, save time, often we had things on paper as well as things on file, so it was quite time consuming to try and find something, and often you wouldn't know where to look. The thing I really like about the Therefore software is having all our files electronically and saved into the system meant that we could actually get rid of our whole lot of old filing cabinets where we previously kept all our paper files. We've been able to save everything in one place, so when you're looking for information you can really quickly find it and you know that what you've got is accurate and that's the whole picture. The way that you save and access the documents is really intuitive as well, and it's meant that we have got into some really good habits of the way in which we title and reference our documents. And it also means that I know if I'm searching for something I can enter a keyword and it's going to bring up anything related to that search, whether it be in the document itself or in the title, so it's really quick and efficient. The other thing I really like about the Therefore software is the security, so you know who has access to which files. If you're working together on a project or a document, you can really quickly see what changes another person has made or access an old version of the document. The thing I like the most about it is that my team have a whole lot more time, and so it's the increased efficiency and the ability that they then have to do other things. But it also means that when we've had a request for information, we're quickly able to deliver on it, and that's a really good thing.